Park Do-hyun was not unconscious. His body was slumped awkwardly in his leather chair, his lips slightly parted as if his strength had finally failed him. To anyone watching, the feared dragon of Seoul had finally collapsed under the weight of 67 brutal years. But beneath his heavy eyelids, Do-hyun was watching. Every sound, every movement. In his world, loyalty was a fairy tale. Business partners were vultures. Family were heirs waiting for his pulse to stop. On the table beside him sat an open envelope filled with cash. More than enough to change a poor man's life. Because Park Do-hyun believed one thing about human nature. Everyone had a price. And today, a small boy in yellow gloves was about to make a choice. In a world where everyone has a price, would a child choose a billionaire's fortune, or a stranger's life? Stay with us until the end to see the heartbreaking sacrifice that turned a mafia boss into a guardian. If you believe that a small act of kindness can change a life, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Join our community of millions who believe in the power of a good heart. Let's see how many of us are out there. Inside the luxury office, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive tobacco and old money cedar. Behind Do-hyun's slumped body, the wall safe stood wide open, its steel door yawning to reveal a glowing hoard of stacked cash. It was a king's ransom, left exposed like raw bait. Do-hyun waited in the clinical silence. Then, the heavy mahogany doors creaked. A woman named Adana entered. She was his newest maid, a Nigerian immigrant who had been cleaning his mansion for only a month. She worked with a quiet, desperate efficiency, her eyes always cast downward, hiding the exhaustion of a woman working 3 jobs to survive in a foreign land. Adana was a widow, a fact Do-hyun had memorized from her dossier. She lived in a cramped apartment with no safety net, only her 6-year-old son, Samuel. Today, because of a sudden school closure, she had been forced to smuggle the boy into the mansion. She had hidden him in the shadow of her cleaning cart, praying the monster of the north wouldn't discover him. If Do-hyun saw the child, she wouldn't just be fired, she would be erased from his payroll and his sight forever. Do-hyun heard the rhythmic swish-swish of a mop, followed by the tiny, barefoot patter of a child. "Stay right there, Samuel," Adana hissed in a terrified whisper. "Do not breathe. Do not look up. That man in the chair, he is a giant. If he wakes up and sees you, we will have nowhere to go. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mummy," a soft, youthful voice replied. Do-hyun, feigning his collapse, felt a strange ripple of anticipation. He waited for the boy to notice the safe. He waited for the small hands to reach for the stacks of bills. He expected the sound of rustling paper. Instead, he heard a small gasp of concern. Adana's breathing was a jagged mess of nerves as she moved toward the far end of the expansive office, her mop bucket trailing a scent of lemon and bleach that felt like a sacrilege in this room of leather and tobacco. She glanced back one last time, her eyes burning with a silent, desperate plea. "Samuel, please," she mouthed, though no sound came out. With a final look at the slumped, ivory-faced giant in the chair, she vanished behind the heavy library curtains to tend to the floor, leaving her son in the oppressive silence of the dragon's lair. Samuel stood perfectly still. He was a small island of innocence in a sea of dark mahogany. His oversized yellow gloves hung loosely from his wrists, making him look even smaller, even more fragile. For a moment, he simply stared at his feet. His small sandals were dusty, a stark contrast to the black, glass-like polish of Do-hyun's Oxfords. But then, a glint of light caught the corner of his eye. The wall safe was not just open, it was an invitation. From his low vantage point, the stacks of cash inside the steel box seemed to glow, illuminated by the warm, hidden spotlights of the office. There was so much of it, more paper than Samuel had ever seen in his life. He knew what it was. He had seen his mother cry over single slips of this green paper late at night at their kitchen table. He knew that this paper meant his mother wouldn't have to work until her hands bled. It meant that the giant wouldn't have to be feared. Do-hyun, listening with the intensity of a predator, heard the soft, hesitant scuff of Samuel's sandals on the silk rug. Here it comes, he thought, his heart hardening into a cold, familiar knot. Walk to the safe, little boy. Take the bait. Prove to me that your mother's poverty has already poisoned your heart. The footsteps grew louder. Samuel was moving. Do-hyun could almost feel the child's shadow falling across his knees as the boy bypassed the executive chair. The air in the room seemed to thin. Samuel was now standing directly in front of the safe. His large, expressive dark brown eyes reflected the gold and green of the fortune. He reached out, his yellow-gloved hand trembling slightly as it neared a stack of $100 bills that sat precariously on the edge. The dragon waited for the rustle of the paper, the quick, frantic movement of a thief. Instead, Samuel's hand bypassed the cash. The boy's brow furrowed in deep concentration. He wasn't looking at the money, he was looking at the steel door of the safe, which swung slightly on its hinges. With a soft, rhythmic grunt of effort, Samuel leaned his small weight against the heavy door. He didn't want the money. He wanted to hide it. To the boy, the open safe was a mistake, a broken thing that needed to be fixed before the giant woke up and grew angry. As the safe door clicked shut with a heavy, metallic thud, Samuel let out a long sigh of relief. He turned back to the collapsed man, his face filled not with greed, but with a terrifyingly pure worry. The metallic click of the safe door echoed through the room like a gavel, and for a heartbeat, Do-hyun's mind faltered. The boy had closed it. He had locked away a fortune that could have bought his mother's freedom for a lifetime. But the test wasn't over, the dragon remained still, his internal skepticism clawing for a different explanation. Perhaps the child was simply clever, hiding the theft he intended to commit later. Do-hyun felt the air shift as Samuel stepped closer to the chair. The boy's presence was a soft, warm energy against the clinical coldness of the office. He heard the faint, rubbery squeak of the yellow gloves. Samuel was standing directly over him now, his small shadow draping over Do-hyun's ivory-colored face. Then, something unexpected happened. Samuel didn't reach for the gold watch on Do-hyun's wrist or the silk wallet tucked into his charcoal jacket. Instead, the boy turned back toward the safe. With a grunt of exertion, he pulled on the heavy handle until it clicked open once more. Do-hyun's mental walls braced. Here it is, he thought, the second thought, the greed finally winning out. He heard the rustle of paper, a thick, heavy stack of bills being lifted. He waited for the sound of it being shoved into a pocket or hidden under a shirt. Instead, he felt the boy's small, steady hands gently lifting his head. Samuel moved with a tenderness that was almost painful to endure. He wasn't robbing the giant, he was trying to comfort him. The boy had noticed that Do-hyun's head was lolling at an uncomfortable angle against the stiff leather of the executive chair. To Samuel, the stacks of money weren't currency, they were merely blocks, the only soft-looking things in this room of hard wood and cold steel. Carefully, Samuel slid the thick bundle of $10,000 stacks beneath Do-hyun's neck, creating a makeshift pillow. The dragon felt the weight of $100,000 supporting his head, a king's ransom used as a common cushion. "There," Samuel whispered, his voice a feather-light vibration in the silent room. "Now you can dream better, grandfather." The word grandfather hit Do-hyun harder than any physical blow ever had. In his world, that title was earned through blood or stolen through power. But in the mouth of this child, it was a simple offering of kinship. Samuel leaned in closer, his large dark eyes searching Do-hyun's face for a sign of life, his yellow-gloved hand lingering near the boss's shoulder. He wasn't looking at the safe. He was looking at the man. The makeshift pillow of currency was a cold comfort compared to the heat radiating from the boy's small, busy frame. Samuel did not step away after securing the money. Instead, the soft, rubbery squeak of his oversized yellow gloves returned as he reached into the pocket of his faded brown shorts. He pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth, a scrap of an old t-shirt his mother had given him to help with the light dusting in the hallways. Samuel turned toward the silver tray on the mahogany desk, where a crystal pitcher of ice water sat sweating in the afternoon heat. He dipped the cloth into the water, the clink of the ice against the glass sounding like a thunderclap in the silent office. Do-hyun's muscles tensed beneath his charcoal suit. He had survived assassination attempts, betrayal by his own lieutenants, and the cold steel of blades, but the sensation of a cold, wet cloth being pressed gently against his forehead was a foreign invasion. "Mummy says the heat makes the heart tired," Samuel murmured, his voice thick with a child's earnest gravity. With slow, meticulous strokes, the boy began to wipe the ivory skin of Do-hyun's brow. The yellow gloves were clumsy, yet the touch behind them was impossibly light. Samuel was cleaning the dragon, treating the most feared man in Seoul like a feverish patient. As the cool water trickled down Do-hyun's temple, the billionaire felt a strange, terrifying sensation, a crack in the armor he had worn for 40 years. He had forgotten what it felt like to be touched without an agenda. Usually, hands reached for him to take, to strike, or to bow in forced submission. But this child was looking for nothing. Samuel's large, expressive eyes were inches away, searching Do-hyun's face with a kindness that felt like a searing light. Then, Samuel reached into his other pocket and produced a small, crushed plastic bag containing a single, half-eaten piece of dry cornbread. It was clearly his lunch, the only thing he had to call his own. He placed it on the mahogany desk, right next to the dragon's motionless hand. "Eat when you wake up, grandfather," the boy whispered. "It makes you strong." Do-hyun's heart, a stone that had been polished smooth by decades of cynicism, suddenly felt heavy and jagged in his chest. He was a man who owned a fleet of shipping lines and a dozen high-rise hotels, yet he was being fed by a child who barely had enough to eat. The warmth of the boy's concern was more suffocating than any threat. He wanted to open his eyes and roar, to end this agonizingly pure display of humanity, but he found himself paralyzed by a new kind of fear, the fear of breaking the silence of a saint. The silence of the office was shattered by the sharp, rhythmic clatter of a mop bucket. Adana stepped through the heavy library curtains, a weary smile already forming on her lips as she prepared to tell Samuel it was time to move to the next hallway. But the smile died instantly, replaced by a gray, bloodless mask of horror. The mop fell from her hands, clattering against the hardwood with a sound like a gunshot. Her eyes locked onto the scene, her son, his small hand in its bright yellow glove resting directly on the shoulder of the King of Seoul. She saw the collapsed giant, the open safe, and the crumpled plastic bag of cornbread sitting like an insult on the $1 million mahogany desk. Samuel, her voice was a strangled, guttural sob. She didn't walk, she collapsed forward, her knees hitting the rug with a heavy thud as she scrambled toward the chair. She grabbed Samuel by the waist, yanking him back so hard he stumbled. She didn't look at her son, she couldn't. Her gaze was fixed on the motionless face of Park Do-hyun, waiting for the dragon to roar, waiting for the guards to burst through the doors and end their lives for this impossible transgression. "Sir. Please. He is just a child." Adana wailed, her forehead pressing into the floor in a deep, desperate kowtow. "I am sorry. I will work for nothing, I will give you my life, just do not hurt him. He didn't know. He thought you were sick." She was trembling so violently that the floorboard seemed to vibrate beneath her. To Adana, this wasn't just a mistake, it was a death sentence. She knew the stories of the men who had crossed Park Do-hyun, men who had disappeared for far less than a child's disrespectful touch. She clutched Samuel to her chest, her tears soaking into his off-white shirt, trying to shield his small body with her own. "Mummy, he's cold," Samuel whispered, confused by the storm of her terror. "I was just helping." "Hush, Samuel." "Hush," she hissed, her voice thick with the salt of her tears. "Pray, Samuel. Pray he doesn't wake up angry." Do-hyun sat in the center of her nightmare, feeling the heat of her panic. It radiated off her in waves, a raw, primal fear that turned his stomach. He had spent his life cultivating this terror, wearing it like a crown, but hearing this mother beg for her child's life over a gesture of kindness made the dragon feel like a common monster. The test had reached its boiling point. It was time for the king to rise. The office grew unnervingly cold as the dragon finally stirred. It was not a sudden movement, but a slow, calculated unfurling, like a predator awakening from a long slumber. Park Do-hyun groaned, a low, guttural vibration that seemed to pull the oxygen out of the room. He shifted his weight, the expensive leather of his chair creaking under his lean frame, and slowly, his heavy eyelids lifted. Adana let out a choked sound of terror, her face still pressed against the rug. She pulled Samuel deeper into the shadow of her body, her fingers digging into the boy's shoulders as if she could make him vanish through sheer will. Do-hyun did not look at the open safe. He did not look at the stacks of cash Samuel had used as a pillow, nor did he acknowledge the damp cloth that had cooled his brow. His eyes, deep brown and as hard as obsidian, scanned the room with a clinical, terrifying detachment. He reached up, his movements fluid and precise, and brushed the yellow glove's lingering warmth from his shoulder as if flicking away a piece of lint. He sat up straighter, his sharp cheekbones casting long, jagged shadows in the afternoon light. He didn't speak at first, he simply stared at the mahogany desk. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he extended a finger, tipped with a gold cufflink that caught the sun, and pointed to a spot near the corner of the wood. There, barely visible to the naked eye, was a microscopic scratch, likely left by the plastic zipper of Samuel's pocket or the rough movement of the water pitcher. "Do you see this?" Do-hyun's voice was a dry rasp, lower and more dangerous than any shout. Adana looked up, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "Sir, I—" "Silence," he commanded, the word cutting through the air like a blade. He leaned forward, his intimidating gaze locking onto the trembling boy. He completely ignored the untouched fortune in the safe. To Do-hyun, the trap had shifted. He wanted to see if the weight of a debt would crush the spirit he had just witnessed. This desk was carved from a single trunk of ancient wood. "It is a masterpiece that has sat in this office for 40 years, he growled, his voice dripping with a fake, icy venom. "And now, it is scarred." He looked at Samuel, his expression a mask of stern, old money authority. "You thought you were helping, little boy. In my world, help is a word used by those who cannot afford their mistakes. This scratch, the restoration alone costs more than your life is worth on paper." He paused, letting the silence heavy with the mother's muffled sobs fill the room. "How do you intend to pay for what you have broken?" The air in the library was thick with the scent of Adana's salt-heavy tears and the sharp, metallic tang of the dragon's authority. Samuel stood at the center of the storm, his small frame dwarfed by the looming presence of Park Do-hyun. He looked down at the microscopic scratch on the dark wood, then up at the man whose eyes held the coldness of a winter sea. The boy didn't cry. Instead, his brow furrowed in that same intense, thoughtful concentration he had used to fix the safe. He reached for his left wrist. The oversized yellow cleaning glove made his movements clumsy, so he tugged it off with his teeth, letting it fall to the expensive rug like a shed skin. Beneath the rubber was a simple, hand-woven bracelet made of deep red and earth-toned clay beads. It was frayed at the edges, the string darkened by years of wear, yet it was the only thing on the boy's person that looked truly alive. With steady fingers, Samuel untied the knot. "Samuel, no!" Adana whispered, her voice a broken plea from the floor. She knew what that bracelet was. It was the last thing Samuel's father had placed on his wrist before the factory accident in Lagos, a token of prayer, a promise of a return that never happened. Samuel ignored the panic. He stepped forward until his stomach was nearly touching the edge of the mahogany desk. He reached out and placed the small circle of beads directly over the scratch Do-hyun had pointed to. "I don't have the paper money, grandfather," Samuel said, his voice quiet but strangely resonant in the high-ceilinged room. "But this is the most powerful thing I have. My daddy said as long as I wear this, no harm can touch me. It's for protection." He looked directly into Do-hyun's obsidian eyes, refusing to flinch. "I am giving my protection to you now. If I give it to you, then the scratch is paid for, and you won't be angry at Mummy anymore. You can keep it. You need it more than me because you look very lonely when you sleep." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence that seemed to stretch back through 40 years of Do-hyun's blood-stained history. The dragon looked down at the battered clay beads resting on his $1,000,000 desk. He had been offered bribes of gold, offshore accounts, and the lives of enemies, but no one had ever offered him their own safety. No one had ever looked at his empire and seen a man who was simply lonely. Do-hyun's hand, the one that had signed death warrants without a tremor, shook almost imperceptibly as he reached for the bracelet. The beads were still warm from the boy's skin. As his fingers closed around the humble offering, the icy mask of the Mafia Boss didn't just crack, it shattered. The clay beads felt like coals in Do-hyun's palm, burning through the layers of callous and cynicism he had spent a lifetime growing. He looked down at the battered bracelet, then his gaze drifted to Samuel's feet. They were bare, the soles toughened by the sun and the dust of a long journey from a world Do-hyun only knew through spreadsheets and news reports. The boy stood there, unprotected and vulnerable, having surrendered his only shield to a man who possessed everything yet had nothing. For the first time in 40 years, the dragon felt the suffocating weight of his own shadow. He looked at Adana, still trembling on the floor, her life reduced to a series of apologies and fears. He looked at the safe, its piles of paper suddenly appearing like the worthless trash they were in the face of a child's sacrifice. A single, hot tear escaped Do-hyun's eye, tracing a path through the age lines of his ivory skin. It was followed by another. The sound of his own muffled sob startled him. It was a rusty, unused sound, like an old engine turning over after decades of neglect. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't hide. He sat in his charcoal suit, a billionaire and a butcher, weeping over a string of clay beads. "Sir," Adana whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of confusion. Do-hyun didn't answer her immediately. He pressed a button on the underside of his desk. Within seconds, the heavy doors of the library swung open, and two burly men in black suits stepped inside, their faces masks of lethal readiness. They stopped dead, their eyes darting between the crying boss and the small boy in the middle of the room. "Boss?" one of them asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his holster. "Close the safe," Do-hyun commanded, his voice thick and raw, but possessed by a new kind of authority. "Lock it. I never want to see it open in this room again." The guards hesitated, stunned, before rushing to obey the metallic clatter of the steel door closing. Do-hyun stood up, his joints protesting, and walked around the desk. He didn't tower over Samuel this time, he knelt. It was a painful, awkward movement for a man of his stature, but he forced his knees to the rug until he was eye level with the boy. "You are right, Samuel," Do-hyun whispered, his voice shaking. "I have been very lonely." He turned to the guards, who were standing frozen by the safe. "Go to the kitchen. Tell the chef to prepare the best of everything. Not for me. For my guests. Bring the finest fruit, the warmest bread, and the softest silks." He looked back at Samuel and Adana, his obsidian eyes finally reflecting a soft, human light. "The test is over. Today, the dragon finally learns how to be a man." The seasons in Seoul shifted with a gentleness that Park Do-hyun had never noticed before. The sharp, clinical cold of his office had been replaced by the soft fragrance of cherry blossoms and the sound of laughter echoing through the once silent hallways of his mansion. The dragon had not merely closed his safe, he had begun to dismantle the fortress of his life, brick by bitter brick. 6 months after the day of the clay beads, a black sedan pulled up to the gates of the most prestigious elementary school in the city. The guards at the gate stood a little straighter, recognizing the license plate, but the man who stepped out of the vehicle was not the terrifying figure they expected. Do-hyun emerged first, his steel-gray hair catching the morning sun. He still wore his charcoal pinstripe suits, tailored to perfection, but his posture had lost its predatory stiffness. He moved with a quiet, grounded grace, his eyes no longer scanning for enemies, but looking down at the small boy who hopped out of the car after him. Samuel was no longer the barefoot child in faded brown shorts. He wore a crisp navy blazer and a neatly knotted tie, his dark curls trimmed into a sharp, confident style. His expressive eyes sparkled with the excitement of a new world, though he stayed close to the older man's side. The most striking sight, however, was what the Mafia Boss was carrying. Slung over Do-hyun's structured shoulder, resting against the expensive Italian wool of his suit, was a bright red and blue Spider-Man backpack. It was a jarring, beautiful sight, a man who had spent 40 years carrying the weight of blood and secrets now proudly bearing the weight of a child's schoolbooks. Adana watched from the car, her eyes wet with tears of joy. She was no longer a maid, she was the director of Do-hyun's new educational foundation, but today she was simply a mother watching her son walk toward a future she had once thought impossible. As they reached the school's stone archway, Do-hyun knelt down, ignoring the dust that gathered on his polished Oxford shoes. He adjusted Samuel's collar with a steady hand, his touch light and fatherly. "Do not be afraid of the lessons, Samuel," Do-hyun whispered, his voice no longer a dry rasp but a warm, resonant hum. "A man with a sharp mind is harder to break than a man with a sharp blade." Samuel reached out and touched the small, beaded bracelet that Do-hyun now wore permanently around his own wrist, tucked just beneath his silver watch. "You'll be here when the bell rings, grandfather." "I will be right here," Do-hyun promised, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "The dragon has retired from the war. I have much more important work to do." As Samuel ran toward the classroom, Do-hyun stood and watched until the boy disappeared inside, the red backpack a small beacon of hope in a life that had finally found its light. The mahogany office was exactly as it had been 20 years ago, though the air no longer carried the sharp scent of fear. The heavy curtains were pulled back, allowing the golden light of a Seoul sunset to bathe the room in warmth. Samuel, now a man in his late 20s with broad shoulders and the same expressive, kind eyes, stood behind the massive desk. He wore a suit as fine as any the dragon had ever owned, but his hands, clean and steady, remained free of the blood that had once defined this room. On the desk lay a single document, sealed with the wax crest of the Park estate, and a small, weathered velvet box. Samuel's fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. He didn't need to read the legal jargon of the billions in assets, the shipping lines converted into humanitarian fleets, or the high-rises turned into community centers. His eyes skipped to the handwritten note at the very end, penned in a shaky, elegant script. "To my grandson, Samuel," the letter began. "In a world that taught me to keep my eyes open even in sleep, you were the only one who showed me it was safe to close them. My children by blood waited for me to die so they could count my gold, you waited for me to wake so you could offer me your bread. I leave you this empire not because you are a soldier, but because you are a gardener. You know how to make things grow where I only knew how to make them fall. I gave you my money, Samuel, but you gave me a reason to finally close my eyes and truly sleep. Carry the bracelet. It protected me more than any bulletproof glass ever could." Samuel let out a long, shaky breath, the weight of the legacy settling onto his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a gift. He reached for the velvet box and clicked it open. Inside, resting on a cushion of white silk, was the clay-beaded bracelet. It was old and frayed, but a jeweler had reinforced the string with threads of 24-karat gold, and the beads had been polished until they shone like rubies. He looked toward the burgundy executive chair. It was empty now, the dragon having passed peacefully in his sleep 3 days prior, a faint smile on his lips and the bracelet wrapped around his wrist. Samuel walked to the wall safe. He didn't open it to check the contents. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, modern toy, a gift he had prepared for the opening of the newest Samuel Okoye Youth Center. He placed it on the side table, right next to a framed photo of an old man in a charcoal suit carrying a Spider-Man backpack. "Safe now, grandfather," Samuel whispered into the quiet room. He turned and walked toward the door, the clay beads hidden beneath his sleeve, a billionaire who knew that the richest heart is the one that gives when it has nothing left to lose. The dragon was gone, but the light he had found in a pair of yellow cleaning gloves would shine for generations to come. The story of Park Do-hyun and Samuel reminds us that the core of our humanity is the wealth of the heart. It proves that true richness isn't found in a locked bank vault, but in our capacity for radical empathy and selfless sacrifice. By seeing the world through the eyes of a child, even a hardened dragon can be set free. This journey shows us that Afro-Korean solidarity and simple compassion can transcend language, status, and race, reminding us all that kindness is the only truly universal currency. Samuel began his journey with nothing but a pair of yellow gloves and a heart of gold. He proved that you don't need a fortune to change the world, you just need the courage to be kind. Now, we want to hear from you. Which part of Samuel's sacrifice touched you the most? Was it the money pillow he made for the boss, or the protection bracelet he gave up to save his mother? Let us know in the comments below, we read every single one. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We bring you stories that remind us all what it truly means to be human. Remember, the poorest pocket can hold the richest heart. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.